Assalamualaikum and good day, Mr. Franklin. My name is Intan binti Jasni. For today's presentation, I'll be focusing on Malaysia's trade performance from year 2020 to 2025. So, I'll start first by giving a brief overview of the topic before we look deeper into each year. First, why does this topic matter? Malaysia's trade performance plays a major role in shaping our economic growth and competitiveness. Understanding these trends helps us see how Malaysia adapts to global challenges and opportunities. Next, why I'm focusing specifically on this year 2020 to 2025. This year represents a very significant period for Malaysia. 2020 marks the COVID-19 crisis when global trade experienced a major downturn. The years 2020 to 2023 capture the economic recovery phase, where trade started to rebound, and 2024 to 2025 represent a stage of global trade normalization, where Malaysia begins returning to more stable growth patterns. For this presentation, I will cover several key areas to give a complete picture of Malaysia's trade performance. This will guide the structure of my presentation, and I'll explain each of them in details as we move through this slide. Now, let's take a closer look at the line chart showing Malaysia's overall trade performance from 2020 to 2025. In year 2020, trade was around Rm 1.78 trillion, which shows a major downturn. This was mainly due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which disrupted many sectors and reduced both imports and exports. In year 2021, we can see some recovery, with trade increasing to Rm 2.711 trillion. As the economy started reopening, trade activity picked up again. Then, in 2022, Malaysia reached a record high of Rm 2.85 trillion. This strong growth was largely driven by global demand, especially in electronics and key commodities. However, in 2023, trade declined slightly to Rm 2.62 trillion, reflecting a global economic slowdown that affected export and imports. In 2024, trade stabilized at around Rm 2.63 trillion, showing that Malaysia's trade had adjusted to the new global conditions. Finally, for 2025, trade is projected to remain stable or slightly increase as Malaysia continues to recover and strengthen its position in international trade. So from this chart, we can see the key trends: a sharp drop in 2020, a strong recovery in 2022, a slight dip in 2023, and a stabilization from 2024 onwards. The growth and decline patterns follow the global economics situation, and the main reason the pandemic recovery efforts, global demand, and economic conditions worldwide. Next, let's look at Malaysia's domestic export and re-exports from 2020 to 2025. During this period, both domestic exports and re-exports experienced significant fluctuations. In 2020, domestic exports were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic as global demand fell and supply chains were disrupted. Re-exports also slowed down due to reduced trade flows. From 2021 to 2022, we see a strong recovery in both domestic exports and re-exports, driven by rising global demand, especially for electronics, palm oil, and other key commodities. This period marked some of the highest export growth rates in recent years. In year 2023, export growth slightly slowed down due to global economic slowdown, but domestic export and re-export remained relatively strong compared to 2020. By 2024, exports stabilized, showing consistent performance as Malaysia adapted to post-pandemic trade conditions. Finally, for 2025, exports are projected to remain stable or show moderate growth, reflecting continued demand from the key trading partners and Malaysia's participation in international trade agreements. So overall, the trends domestic export and re-export closely follows the broader trade performance. If you look at the chart, we can see that intermediate goods consistently make up the largest share of imports, followed by capital goods and then consumption goods. Consumption goods gradually increased to about Rm 180 billion in 2020 before stabilizing at Rm 185 billion in 2024, with a slight projected increase in 2025. For capital goods, these imports were about Rm 300 billion in 2020, grew to Rm 380 billion in 2022, and are projected to reach around Rm 400 billion by 2025. For the intermediate goods, this is the largest category, starting roughly Rm 600 billion in 2020, rising to 800 billion in 2022, thus stabilizing around Rm 820 billion in 2024, with a small projected increase in 2025. From this chart, we can observe the trends. Import dropped in 2020 due to the COVID-19, recovered strongly in 2021 to 2022, and stabilized in 2023 to 2024, with projection for slight growth in 2025. On this slide, we are looking at Malaysia's major export sectors for the period of January to September 2025. This pie chart highlights the key contributors to our export performance. The largest portion is electrical and electronic product sector, which dominates with a total export value of Rm 512.1 billion. This clearly shows how important the E&E industry to our economy, making up the backbone of our export market. Next, we have petroleum contributing Rm 77.4 billion, although much smaller compared to E&E sector. Following that are palm oil and palm oil-based agriculture products, which recorded Rm 60.9 billion. This sector continues to be an important traditional export for Malaysia. Then, we have machinery, equipment and parts at Rm 58 billion, reflecting our country's growing capabilities in manufacturing and industrial components. Lastly, chemical and chemical products contributed Rm 48.8 billion, rounding out the top 5 export categories. Overall, this pie chart shows while Malaysia's export landscape is diverse. So, moving on the next slide, this chart shows Malaysia's major imports by sector for the same period, January to September 2025. Similar to our export structure, electrical and electronic products make up one of the largest imports categories. This is mainly because many components used in our manufacturing industries still need to be sourced from abroad. Next, we have machinery, equipment, and parts, which continue to be a key import group. These items support industrial activities and help drive production across various sectors. Petroleum products also form a significant portion of our imports, reflecting domestic demand for refined fuels and industrial use. Following that are chemical and chemical products, which are essential inputs for manufacturing, agriculture, and various industrial processes. We also import a noticeable volume of manufacturers of metal, which are needed for construction, machinery production, and infrastructure projects. Another important category is transport equipment, which includes vehicles and parts that support both consumer and commercial transportation needs. Now, let's take a closer look at Malaysia's major export destination for 2025. This chart shows the top countries that receive the largest share of our exports, and I briefly break down each one. First, Singapore. Singapore remains one of Malaysia's most important export partners. A big portion of our export to Singapore consists of electrical and electronic products, petroleum-based goods, and processed food. Next, the United States. The US is a major buyer of Malaysia's high-value products, especially electronics, semiconductors, medical devices, and machinery parts. Demand for the US is closely tied to the technology and manufacturing sectors, which make it a critical destination for our export-driven economy. Then, China. China is another vital export destination, particularly for industrial inputs, electronics, chemicals, and palm oil-related products. Strong trade ties with China reflect its role as both a major manufacturing hub and a large consumer market. Moving on to Hong Kong. Hong Kong plays a unique role as both a direct market and re-export hub. Many of the electronic components exported to Hong Kong are then channeled into global supply chains, especially for the technology and telecommunication industries. Lastly, Taiwan. Taiwan imports a large share of Malaysia's electronic components, machinery, parts, and industrial materials. Overall, this export destination shaped Malaysia's trade policy by pushing us to maintain strong diplomatic and economic relationships. ensure smoother customs processes, and strengthen agreements that support supply chain stability. So, let's move on to Malaysia's major import sources for 2025. This slide shows the key countries we rely on for essential goods, components, and raw materials that support our industries and daily consumption. First, China. China continues to be Malaysia's largest source of imports. We rely heavily on China for electrical and electronic components, machinery, industrial materials, and consumer goods. Next, Singapore. Singapore is our second major import source. Many of these imports are actually re-exported goods that pass through Singapore's advanced logistics systems. Then Taiwan. Taiwan supplies Malaysia with high technology components, especially for the semiconductor and electronic sectors. And lastly, Japan. Japan supplies Malaysia with automobiles, machinery, industrial equipment, and high-quality steel products. And last but not least, Indonesia. Indonesia is a major source of raw materials and agriculture-related imports. This includes food products, energy-related goods, and written industrial inputs. So overall, these imports used sources reflect Malaysia's strong integration in global supply chains. Now, let's move on to trade with ASEAN FTA countries. In this part, I want to highlight some of our most important trading partners: China, Singapore, Thailand, the United States, and Japan. First, China remains one of the largest and most influential trade partners. Our trade relationship with China is driven by strong demand for manufactured goods, electronics, and raw materials. These partnerships also benefit from long-standing supply chain connection across the region. Next is Singapore, which plays major role as a regional hubs for logistics, finance, and high-value goods. We are also trade extensively with Thailand, especially in sectors like agriculture, automotive components, and consumer products. Beyond ASEAN, we also engage in significant trade with the United States. The US is an important destination for high-value exports such as technology, electronics, and specialized products. Finally, Japan. Japan continues to be reliable and long-term economic partners. Let's take a look at Malaysian export by state in 2024. This pie chart shows the contribution of each state to our total exports. First, Pulau Pinang leads the way with 40% of total exports. This is largely due to its strong manufacturing sector, especially in electronics and electrical products. Next is Johor, contributing 25%. Johor benefits from its strategic location near Singapore and its diverse industry, including manufacturing and petrochemicals. Selangor comes in at 21%, driven by its mix of manufacturing, services, and logistic hubs, making it one of the most industrialized states in the country. Sarawak counts for 9%, mainly from oil and gas, timber, and palm-based products. Finally, the Federal Territory of Kuala Lumpur contributes 4.7%, which is smaller compared to the other states, but it plays an important role in trade-related services, finance, and administrative function. Overall, you can see that the bulk of Malaysia's exports are concentrated in states with strong industrial and manufacturing bases, which highlights the importance of regional economic hubs for our national trade.